what would you say is the best way for other people to either receive it or to prepare for it, or not even prepare, but I want to make sure I'm using the right word, but you know what I mean.
You'll have to ask Diana that because she's far more expertise at being able to give you an answer. I can just tell you that it's going to be white hot and it's going to be all over the media. How people are going to take it, that's out of my wheelhouse. I think Diana would be far better qualified to answer that question than me because I wouldn't even know. I know it's coming and I know that people are going to find out. They're going to know about it because it's going to be very, very public. But with that said, Diana, that's a great question. How do people prepare for?
I mean, is it that big? Is it going to be like
Well, I mean, I don't want to cause anxiety. I mean, it's not there's going to be a run on Wall Street or anything, but it's major. Yeah, it's going to be, for the uninitiated, it's going to be a holy cow moment. For those who have been in this topic for a while, it's going to be fascinating and interesting, but they're probably not going to be surprised. But the other 99.9% of the population, that's a different story. And that's why I think, Diana here probably has a hell of a lot better insight to that than recommendations than I do.
Well, I'm not okay. So not knowing what's going to happen, it's good. It's hard for me to answer the question, but I have had conversations with people who want to ask me about how will people deal with some type of event like that should it happen. And especially they asked me about how will people who are religious deal with it. And I've been in religious communities of religious people my whole life, and have studied all different kinds of religions. Like religious studies has been my life, and I would say that for very orthodox people from different faiths, be it Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, I would say that for them, they're going to be all right because they already have a framework. And I'm talking about people who actually are, when I say orthodox, I'm talking about people who believe in the angels and believe in those things and believe in the beings that are not human, non-human intelligence, basically. For the people who just go to church because it's a habit, they're going to have an issue. Like they're going to have the issue that I had really when, as an academic, I started to study this. And I was all of a sudden surrounded by scientists who studied it as real and showed me evidence. And I saw their lives and how they lived. And that's shocking. They'll be shocked. But it's not a shock they can't get over. And that's when people are going to be asking you, like, what do we do now? And it sounds like you're already developing the teams to deal with.
Well, we are, but we have to make sure we can't be prescriptive, right? It can't be, and this is what I keep telling people when they ask me, well, Lou, how should we take it? I do get asked that a lot. And I tell people it's not for me to decide that for you. That's a very personal, don't be so quick to give up your sacred right to think for yourselves. I don't want to think for you, and you don't want me to think for you. I can tell you what I know, and then much beyond that, it's up to you. I think it's dangerous. This is why I've said before, there's parts of this conversation that are certainly national security oriented, right? So if I want to know about these things over a nuclear military base, then yeah, I might get the advice from a 3-star general and say, hey, Bob, what do you think about this? But this topic is much bigger. And I've said before, this is a topic that involves each and every one of us differently and yet equally, depending on whether you were raised and where you're from and culturally and geographically and whatnot and socioeconomically, perhaps. So this is a conversation that affects everybody from a psychological perspective, a sociological perspective, a philosophical perspective, a theological perspective. And in those cases, I don't want a 3 or 4-star general telling me what to think. Stick to national security. I want to hear from other people. I want to hear from my spiritual and religious leaders. I want to hear from my neighbors. I want to hear from my kids. I want to hear from the academics and the scientists. And then let me formulate my own opinion on what this means to me and how it's going to affect my life, if at all. Right. So that is, I want to enable people. I don't want to prescribe anything. Right. I don't want to be one of those guys that says, here, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. That's not it. Because I guarantee you there's a lot smarter people out there than me that probably have a much better idea and understanding of what to do. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm one of those guys. I'm not. I would defer to people like Diana to answer that question more than me. She's a hell of a lot more qualified to answer that than me, you know. And do you really, at the end of the day, do you want a guy like me? I mean, you're not going to offend me, but do you really want a guy with a military and intelligence background prescribing to you or your family how you should morally or mentally or intellectually take this information? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't want someone telling me that. So I get it, you know, and this is why I'm always very, very careful. And this is why again, going back to these types of forums, this is where you're going to solve those problems. You're not going to get it solved only inside the government with a government think tank. Half the time they're wrong anyways. So, you know, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with this conversation being taken to the streets, which is exactly what has happened, and it has been democratized. Nobody is more important and nobody is less important in this conversation. All voices count. Even the ones that don't want to have the conversation, their voices still count. Even the people that hate me on social media and you know, accuse me of all sorts of horrible stuff, yes, their voice counts, and it should. You know, arguably, of course, you ask them, my voice doesn't count, but I think all voices count, and I think they should count. I think it's important that we get everybody's opinion, get everybody at the dinner table. Let's break bread over this and have a conversation.